Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we are taking a look at the Atlas 6 by Oliver Blake. This is a contemporary fantasy slash dark academia, and this first came out on 31st of January of 2020. So I have the physical copy of this book, which comes in at 556 pages. But I actually listened to this one on Audible, which is 16 hours long. So that is the version I'll be reviewing today. As always, we shall take a look at the story, the characters, the world building, and the presentation. We're then going to veer into spoiler territory before I hit my final thoughts at the end of the video. So let's just jump straight in with the story. So how does the story of this one match up? And this is a bit of a complicated one because this is very, very plot light throughout the majority of the story. You are basically thrown in with a recruitment drive by Atlas Blakely, and he is recruiting 6 magicians from within the world who he believes has extraordinary magical abilities, and he's selecting them not just for their abilities but for how they'll mesh as a group, and he's trying to recruit them into the secret society of the Library of Alexandria. Yes, that one from ancient Egypt. And what you basically have here is initially the recruitment process as we meet the initial 6 characters that we meet in here. And then you have a year in the life of these characters as they go through their general lessons, as we get to know who they are, as they develop their various different relationships within this sort of society that they found themselves in. And as they begin to learn more of the cost of being in this society, especially when they discover that only 5 of them will actually graduate as full members, and they find out what happens to the last one. So there is a mystery element going on here, but a lot of it is very much in the background, taking second place to the character work. And it only really gets tied together right at the end of the book when you get a chapter from a different character to the rest, where you suddenly go, oh, because there is a trail of breadcrumbs here. And you can sort of intuit various things that are going on, but it's not completely obvious where it's going or what the end goal really is. And that can make it quite difficult to get into, at least for me personally. I do feel that if I had not listened to the audio version of this, I would have really, really struggled. I know a couple of my friends, Jaleesa over at Reading Beyond the Book Cover and Noah's In Between the Lines, link them down below. I've had a couple of issues with this book initially. So, yeah, it's a bit of a weird one because it's not so much a story. It almost reads more like diary entries by the various people for a lot of it until you really get the reveal at the end. And I don't know if that's good for a reading experience. I'd love to know what other people think, though. So the question is, if this doesn't wow in terms of its story, how does it cope with the characters? And this is, to be honest, a bit of a mixed bag for several different reasons. So you do have, throughout the majority of the book, 6 point of view characters, which are the 6 recruits that are taken on quite close to the beginning of the book. And the initial part of the book is the recruitment process for these characters. I'm going to touch first of all, however, on some of the side characters because they all do have some link into the main plot. So the major sort of driving force of this is Atlas Blakely. So he is the person who acts as the caretaker for the Alexandria Library, and he has gone out and helped select these candidates and goes out to recruit them. He also oversees some of the lessons. However, the majority of the lessons are overseen by Dalton Ellery, someone who we discover a little bit more about throughout the course of the story and is a little bit detached from the group, especially with the exception of one character in particular, which we'll touch on momentarily. The other 2 major characters that we have are Ezra Fowler, who is the partner of Libby Rhodes at the start of the book, who has an issue with Libby's rival Nico de Varona. And you have Gideon Drake, who is a mermaid / satyr who has been sort of under not so much Nico's care, but Nico has been putting up walls to protect him from his own family because there's something different about him. And they all play various different points in the plot, but they all strike me as quite important, especially going forward into the future books. Now, the key thing with all these characters, these are all magicians of different skills and abilities. So there is some overlap of skills here, and that begins straight away with the introduction of Libby Rhodes and Nico de Varona. These two are rivals. They both work in physical magics, specifically the ability to control their environment and energy in their environment as well. And basically, these two are constantly at each other's throats. They're constantly sniping at each other, trying to one-up one another. Libby is the more controlled of the two, doesn't have as much raw natural power, but is really diligent, but is annoyed that she always comes second best to Nico. Now, Nico, for his part, is quite suave, quite arrogant, very much the stereotypical good-looking, arrogant asshole that you get in a lot of YA books. So those two have a bit of a thing going on, but they do very much come as a pair, something that's mentioned straight off. And the whole reason both of those accept the actual sort of opportunity is because of the fact that the other one was asked. And they do have some very natural chemistry as natural rivals amongst each other, and fail to see the good in each other as well. Nico is very self-assured, but actually does have a bit of a heart of gold, whereas Libby has so much crippling self-doubt and is a bit of a whiner in many regards as well, and is, especially at the start of the book, not a particularly likeable character or sympathetic, even though I think she's probably supposed to be. On top of those two, you then have Parisa Kamali. So Parisa is an empath, so can read and manipulate people's thoughts. And she gives the impression of possibly the characters that the author favours the most. She is incredibly smart, very manipulative, constantly trying to get one up with people. She has an interesting relationship with Tristan, who we'll get to in a minute, but very much she's apart from the rest of the group. The rest of the group don't trust her, and she doesn't trust or like them. She sees them as boring and not particularly interesting. Now, she has the most interesting sort of dynamic in terms of with Dalton, Ellery in particular, because there's some stuff that goes on there, and she's very aware of her abilities and how she physically looks as well, as she uses those to her advantage. The next one I want to talk about is Reina Mori. Now, whereas Parisa comes across as a favourite of the author, Reina very much feels like an afterthought. She's from Tokyo, Japan. She has the ability of naturalism, which allows her to basically create life around her, but that takes something from her. And as it turns out, you find out throughout the course of the story that very much her thing is that she can act as a battery to boost others. She's a natural wellspring of power. She's very much there to learn. She's very self-taught. She's just there to get access to the secret books of the archive so she can learn more. But she gets the least character development of all of them. Next, you have Tristan Caine. Tristan is engaged to, I think it's the Duchess of Wessex, if I remember correctly. He's an illusionist, sort of, but his skills aren't completely understood. When we initially meet him, it is told to us that he can see through illusions, and that is partially true, but further into the book you find out a little bit more about what he can actually do. And he has a crippling doubt about himself. He thinks that he's useless. He's the son of a bit of a crime magnate himself and has been verbally and physically abused by his own father because he generated his skills quite late on and there was no real value in his abilities. As it turns out, we don't really understand what his abilities are, but his sort of sense of self-loathing and self-doubt is lent into by the next character, who is Callum Nova. Now, Callum is absolutely horrendous, and props to the VA who read his lines. I want to strangle this person. He is nasty, manipulative. He sees people as things, and that's very important. He sees Parisa as a massive challenge because, just like Parisa, he is kind of a telepath slash empath, but slightly different overlap of skills there. And he tends to use his abilities to influence other people, especially in the case of this Tristan. He has no qualms about killing people. He acts as a advisor to a mega corporation where basically he goes into the negotiations and manipulates people into getting the best deal possible. But he is, to put it as morally bankrupt, is an understatement. There is some stuff later on in the book which makes him a far more interesting character, but by the time you get there, he is just deplorable on every level. My issue with these characters, though, is that you have a lot of time jumps here, and you've got 6 main characters to kind of have to juggle, which gives them at most 75 pages each of their own time. And you do see jumps in their natural abilities, but it's never completely explained how they gain this extra thing, because you don't really go through magic lessons to see them using it. What is interesting is some of the intrapersonal dynamics, especially the growth between Libby and Nico, and the way that Callum kind of manipulates Tristan as well. Libby is very much an afterthought for this, and in Parisa's case, Parisa is very much being used to mine information off the teacher, for want of a better term. So the characters themselves are all quite interesting. I do wish there was either a bit more balance between all 6 of the main characters, or this maybe just dived down on a couple of them and focused on them themselves. But overall, there is some solid character work here, and it does give you a sense of investment in what's going on. The world building in here is actually pretty good. You have the history of the society itself, which, whilst it's not totally explained throughout, you get the sense of this is a society that was forced underground and has moved multiple times over the years, and it tells you where it's been based over the various different years, whereas now it's set in England. You also have the fact that magic is quite commonplace in the world. Now, it wasn't completely clear to me if magic is a known thing or if it's hidden like it is in, say, Harry Potter. I suspect it is at least reasonably well known. But the really cute sort of thing this does is tie this into the way mega corporations work and how magic is used in, say, for example, various different beauty products. There's just a little sprinkling of magic in there to make them work a bit better. And also the fact that magic isn't so much magic, but more seen as a form of science, and it can be understood. And it's something that's being studied, so it can be quantified, which I think is quite interesting as well. And the fact that different people have different levels of power and control, and some people have natural talents on top of that, is really well done. In addition, you also have the fact that this isn't the only secret society, and the way the society works and some of the things they do are a little bit morally grey, to put it mildly, but they blatantly have challengers who want access to those archives. There are other secret societies out there that are very much rivals for this. A major one that's mentioned several times is called the Forum, which very much sounds like the sort of place where the big philosophers would stand up in Greece and discuss their ideas and out in the open where everyone could see. So that's quite interesting as well, and the sort of personal conflict between that. And even the way that magic kind of feels, even though you don't get that much magic use really in here, there's some really interesting ways that it's visualized. For example, when Nico is at one point going through the house and fixing the various defensive wards, and how magic looks to him compared to how it looks to Libby, compare it how it looks to Parisa, and how it reacts to them all in different ways is also really well done. And on top of that, you've got the magical creatures who don't play a huge amount of part in here. Gideon being the main one, who is Nico's friend, but it is mentioned that creatures have a different control of magic to people that's almost more efficient, not as powerful, but is used a lot more delicately and a lot more precisely, which is an interesting little wrinkle as well. So overall, the world building here is actually pretty strong and does help to ground the story and the characters for what it's worth in here. So we'll start off with the cover on presentation. Black and gold, always a winner. It does give you that secret society sort of academia vibe that you quite often get. It's very stylized. I do really like the cover. There are alternative covers out there which are also nice, but this basic cover I think is spectacularly good. And the way that the book is actually structured is quite interesting, because it is structured into, for want of a better, we'll call it parts. Each part is given its own title, and then it's split up into multiple chapters from different points of view within. So it goes from weapons to truth to battle to space, so on and so forth. And actually, the title does a good job of explaining kind of some of the stuff that's going to go on in the chapter that's coming up. Not every character is in every chapter, which is important to note, and some characters do get less time than others. On top of that, I do need to mention this version that I listened to was on Audible and was a full voice cast, so I'm probably going to mispronounce some people in here, and I'm not sure who read who, but Steve West, Shiho Elsmore, Munnery Grace, James Patrick Cronin, David Monotaith, Damian Lynch, Caitlin Kelly, and Andy Ingalls are all the people who narrated this. And they do a pretty good job of the characters that they're narrating. The ones that sort of I felt did an exceptional job was the character of Callum Nova. Made him really, really, really hateful. And Tristan's VA did a good job as well, but no one was bad by any stretch of the imagination. And as mentioned previously, I think the whole reason I managed to actually get through this book is because of the voice work of the narrators. It is pretty strong. For me personally, I thought it was a highlight, and I think if you're struggling with the book version, I would consider listening to the audio book instead. So overall, the presentation is pretty solid. Okay, so we're into spoiler talk now. So this is your spoiler warning. If you don't want to listen to this bit, skip ahead to the end. I'll give you my final thoughts. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. As previously mentioned, this book, for a lot of it, feels quite plot light. And the reason for that is you don't really find out until the very end of the book what's really going on. You discover that partway through the book, one of the people have got to die, and it's their death that powers the wards of the house. And as it turns out, Atlas Blakely, who was once a initiate just like these people today, wanted to overthrow the actual society and take control and use the power of the society to make a better world. Now, you have a key thing here. You've got someone who wants to make a better world. So you do have the various different people that he's employed throughout time to try and get this. Now, one of these is Ezra, who is the partner of Libby. Libby doesn't know this. And what Ezra can do is Ezra is a traveler who can sort of skip forward through time and backwards through time as well. So he's jumped forward in time to help find people so that they can get the right people to basically create time magic. And there are a few hints within the book about this. Some of the studies that they do is specifically around time and space and how to manipulate it. And in fact, you have 2 full sections that are space and time, and then thought and intent. And it's quite an interesting little wrinkle, especially when it turns out that Ezra is not particularly happy at feeling very sidelined as he does at this point, and no longer trusts the, what's the word I'm after? The intent that Atlas now has. He's gone from being, I want to change the world to the better, to I can be a god, or at least that's the read that Ezra gets on it at the end. And that really does tie all the breadcrumbs together and adds a sense of weight to the story. It is very late in the book to pay that off, however. And whilst for me personally it was worth the wait, it is very much watching a 90-minute film and having to wait till the 75th minute for something good to happen. Nothing was bad before, but there was no sense of a true end goal there. And once you get this sort of break of information that this is a long-term plan that's been going on for decades at this point, with Atlas acting as the puppet master and building a team of people around him to sort of try and create this perfect scenario where he can wrest control and make a better world, inverted commas. is a really interesting concept and is enough, for me at least, to hook me into trying the next book out. This is a weird one because this is not a book for everyone. I get the impression that people that don't like this book really will not like this book. And I can understand why. This runs into a problem you see in video games quite often, and films as well. If this was a 90-minute film, you've got to wait till the 75th minute for the really good stuff to happen. Now, that's not to say there's not decent stuff before that. There is. The character work in here is really good, and there is some very clever, subtle foreshadowing going on. But there's not enough there to give you any true inkling of what the end game of the book is. You can piece bits and pieces together, but it's not until the very end where everything gets sort of pulled into one massive tapestry and you can sort of go, aha. And that's a good and a bad thing. The character work is pretty good throughout. I do feel that some characters are shortchanged compared to others. I think that the story itself is almost non-existent past this is the journaling of a group of people going for an academic year, which does play against it a little bit. The world building is pretty solid, and I love some little pieces here and there about the abuse of magic within various different industries, and capitalism in particular. So I liked that as well. So for me, I will be trying out the next book, giving it a listen. I'll do it through audio as well. I do recommend, for me personally, if you're going to check this book out, I would suggest listening to the full audio version rather than going for a book version, which is not something I say very often. But from speaking to a few people and from personal experience, I don't think I would have finished this if it was written. If I'd read it, I should say. So for me, overall, this goes in C tier. It's well written, solid character work, decent world building, and the story does pay off at the end, but it's a long journey to get there. But I know this is a bit of a social media darling, so if you've read this, what did you think of it? Let me know in the comments, and I will catch you all next time.